Some men grieve loud. Silas Crane grieved like a fence post, upright, weathered, saying nothing while the whole prairie leaned on him. He buried his wife in the frost of a February that wouldn't quit, and he did not weep at the grave, not where anyone could see, and after that he stopped expecting the road to bring him anything but wind. I know because I kept the book on him. I keep the book on everyone. It's a habit that's cost me friends and saved me from liars, and there's a column in my ledger with his name at the top and nothing but losses running down it. Then, on a hot afternoon in the back end of that same year, a stranger climbed down off the mail wagon at the mouth of his lane. A small woman with a straw case and a face I'd seen before, seen it every day for 11 years, on the woman we'd just put in the ground, and she carried a box. I want to tell you it was a happy thing. I want to tell you the box held good news. But I've learned that the answers we spend our lives wanting are rarely the ones we could have survived hearing. And what that woman carried up Silas Crane's lane changed the shape of a grief we all thought was finished. He never expected anyone to come back to that ranch, least of all her. Stay with me, this one sits heavy and it earns it. He never expected anyone to return. Then his Chinese wife-sister arrived with answers. The dust came up the lane before she did. That's the thing folks who don't live out here never understand. You see a person coming a full quarter hour before you see the person. First the dust, a low brown feather of it hanging over the ruts. Then the shape of the wagon. Then, if your eyes are still good, and mine were not what they'd been, the small dark bundle sitting up on the box beside old Prout who drove the mail. I was on Silas's east fence that afternoon, restringing wire he'd let go slack, because Silas had let a good many things go slack that year, and I'd taken to fixing them without asking. A man doesn't thank you for that. He just doesn't stop you, which out here amounts to the same thing. I set down my pliers, I remember that. I remember the pliers going into the dry grass and me straightening up with my hand on the small of my back. And I remember thinking, in the flat way you think of ordinary facts, that Prout wasn't due till Thursday. It was Monday. Now I keep a ledger. Have done since I was a boy of 19 and got cheated out of a season's wages by a man who smiled while he did it. In that ledger I write down what's owed and what's paid, who came and who went, weather and calving and the price of beef at the railhead. My wife, God rest her, used to say I'd write down my own funeral if they'd hand me the pencil in the box. Probably true. There's a comfort in columns. The world makes a kind of sense in columns that it never does out loud. And in the column I kept in my head for Silas Crane, there was nothing due to arrive. Not that Monday. Not ever near as I could figure. That's what made the wagon strange before I even knew its cargo. Nothing was owed to that man anymore. The world had settled up with him in February and it had settled cruel. The wagon slowed at the cattle guard. Prout was talking. Prout always talked, but the bundle beside him didn't move, didn't nod, sat with a stillness I found I couldn't read. And then Prout drew rein at the gate and the dust caught up and rolled over the whole lot of them, and out of that dust the small figure stood up on the box and I saw the face. I have to tell this part careful because I've told it wrong before, made it sound like a ghost story to men in a bar who wanted a shiver with their whiskey, and it isn't that. It was worse than that. A ghost would have been easier. It was May's face. Not May, I want to be clear. May Crane had been 11 months in the ground and I'd carried one corner of the box myself, felt through my glove how little she weighed at the end, felt ashamed of noticing. This wasn't May. This was a woman younger, thinner in a different way, a stranger's tiredness on her, but it was May's cheekbones, May's straight, small mouth, May's way of holding her chin like she was deciding whether the world deserved an answer. 11 years I'd watched that chin across Silas's supper table. I'd have known it in the dark. I nearly did know it in the dark of that dust. My mouth went dry. I'll admit it. A grown man of 61 and my hands started to shake on the fence wire and I couldn't have told you why, except that the dead don't send younger copies of themselves up a widower's lane on a Monday. And if they do, a man wants his ledger, wants his columns, wants some place to put a thing so terrible and unaccounted for. She stepped down, careful like her legs had forgotten the ground, and they likely had, if she'd come the way I later learned she'd come, weeks of rail and one long stinking passage before that. She set down a straw case, the kind that folds, tied with cord. And then she reached back up onto the box and lifted down a box of her own. A wooden thing, black lacquered, small enough to carry in 2 arms against the chest, the way you'd carry a sleeping child or a thing you did not trust the road with. Prout saw me and hollered something, I didn't answer. I was already walking, and I didn't remember starting. Reed, Pruitt again, closer now, relieved to see a face he knew. This here lady, I can't make heads of her. She's got a paper with Crane's name. This the Crane place, ain't it? I told her. It's the Crane place. My voice came out wrong. I cleared it. Where'd you get her, Pruitt? Railhead. She come off the Thursday train and sat on the depot bench 2 whole days. Station man says wouldn't be moved, wouldn't take a room, just set there with that box. Had the name wrote on a paper. Crane, Ashfork Road, so I brung her, didn't know what else. He lowered his voice, which for Pruitt meant everyone within 40 feet could hear. She don't hardly talk, some words, not our words mostly. The woman was watching me, not Pruitt. Me because I'd stopped, and something in my face had done a thing I couldn't hide, and she'd caught it. Her eyes went over me slow and then past me up the lane to the house. To the house where a screen door had just banged. I turned. Silas was on the porch. He'd come out at the sound of the wagon the way any man does, wiping his hands on a rag, squinting, and I watched the whole thing hit him the way I'd watched it hit me, only worse, because he'd loved her and I'd only liked her. And there is a difference in what grief will do to a face. He went still. The rag stopped in his hands, and I saw him take 1 step forward off the porch and then stop hard, like he'd walked into the fence himself, and his mouth opened and nothing came out of it. The woman said 1 word. She said it soft, but it carried, because everything carries out here in that dead-still afternoon air. It wasn't English. I didn't know then what it was, but Silas knew. Silas's face came apart when he heard it, just came apart like ground in a thaw, and he made a sound I have never in my life heard a grown man make and hope never to again. The word was a name. I'd learn it later. It was May's name, her real one, the one Silas never used because he couldn't shape it right, and she'd let him call her May to spare them both the daily failure. Her true name in her sister's mouth, in her sister's voice, which was near enough her own voice to raise the hair off your arms. The woman had called out to Silas the way you call to someone you have crossed an ocean to find. And then she'd seen his face, and understood from it, in an instant, without a word of English, the thing she must have crossed that ocean hoping wasn't true. She set the black box down in the dust, very slowly, like her arms had quit. And she folded down beside it, there in the lane, and she keened, that's the only word I have for it, keened, a sound with no bottom to it, while Silas Crane stood frozen on his own ground 20 feet off, unable to go to her, unable to leave, a man learning in real time that the last person on earth who shared blood with his dead wife had come around the whole curve of the world to reach a grave. I did what a man does. I went and I got Pruitt turned around and paid and gone, because grief like that shouldn't have an audience, and Pruitt was 3/4 audience by nature. Then I stood at a distance with my hat in my hands, useless, the way you're useless at these things, and I waited. It was Silas who moved first. Took him a while. But he came down off that porch at last, 1 slow boot at a time, crossed the yard and got down in the dust beside the shaking woman, a big raw-boned man folding himself down to the ground like his own joints were arguing. And he didn't touch her, wouldn't have dared, but he stayed there, close, until the keening wore itself down to something a body could stand to hear. The prairie wind came up. Somewhere a killdeer was going on about nothing. And the 2 of them stayed down in that dust a long time, the widower and the sister, with a black lacquered box between them and a whole ocean of things neither could say to the other in words the other owned. Her name was Ziving. Silas got that much across the first evening and got her into the house, and got a plate in front of her that she didn't touch till he ate first, watching him, like she needed to know the food was safe, or maybe just needed to know how a thing was done at this table before she'd do it. I stayed. Somebody had to, and my own house had been empty 6 years by then and held nothing for me but the same 4 walls and my books. I want to set down what that first evening was, because it mattered, and because I've thought about it more nights than I'll admit. They had almost no words in common. May had learned her English out here over years from Silas and from us. A ranch woman's English, plain and practical, cattle and weather, and the names of tools. Ziving had learned a different English, a port English, from missionaries and from the men who ran the passage. I'd guess words for money, for papers, for please and for how much and for I do not understand. So when the 2 of them tried to talk, it was like watching 2 people reach across a river with arms too short, brushing fingers, missing, trying again. But grief has its own grammar, and they were both fluent in that. She would say a thing, a few of our words strung on a thread of hers, and point to the empty chair, May's chair, that Silas hadn't moved, hadn't let me move. And Silas would understand more than the words and answer with his hands, with his face, with the 1 or 2 words of hers he'd picked up over 11 married years and hoarded like coins. Mostly he answered by getting up and fetching things: a comb of maize, a shawl, a little enameled pin shaped like a swallow that May had worn to church. He laid these things on the table in front of Ziving one at a time, and each time she picked the thing up and held it, and her face did something private, and I looked away because a man should. And through it all the black box sat on the table where she'd set it, unopened. She kept a hand near it, not on it near it, like it was hot. I got out my ledger that night back at my own place, and I sat a long while with the pencil not moving. Finally I wrote the date, and I wrote, "May's sister come, Ziving, come too late." And under that, because the ledger is for the truth and nothing else, I wrote, "Something in the box she's afraid to open. Something she come all this way to hand over and now can't." And I sat there and I thought about that box, and I didn't sleep worth a damn. Here is what I knew about May Crane, going in before any of this, because you'll want to know it, to understand what the box undid. Silas had married her out of San Francisco, near about 12 years before, and nobody out here knew quite how. There'd been talk. There's always talk. Some said he'd sent away for her the way men did. You paid a broker. A bride came off a boat. And if you were decent, you married her, and if you weren't, you didn't, and it was a hard country for the ones who came to men who weren't. Some said worse, said she'd come out of one of those houses in the city, the cribs, the places nobody said the name of in front of the church women, and that Silas had paid a sum to get her free of it. Silas never said. Silas was not a man you asked. And May, if she knew we wondered, and she'd have known, women always know what's wondered about them, May let us wonder and gave us nothing, which I respected. She kept her chin up and her house clean and her rows straight, and she was kinder to me after my Ruth died than my own kin were, brought food I couldn't cook for myself, and sat with me and didn't fill the quiet with foolishness. I owed her. It's in the ledger. A page of small kindnesses I never squared before she died. What I'll say is this: whatever brought May Crane to that ranch, I watched her and Silas 11 years across a supper table, and I watched something grow between them that started as a bargain and did not stay one. I saw him warm his hands and hand her the warm side of the plate. I saw her save the last of the coffee for him and pretend she didn't want it. I saw them, in 100 small, unwitnessed ways they thought no one clocked, choose each other again and again after the choosing was already done and paid for. You can't fake that across a decade. Not out here, where the days are long and there's nobody to perform for. But and here is the thing that sat under everything, the thing I only understood later. Silas never quite believed it. That's the tragedy I didn't see till the box. He never quite believed she'd have chosen him if she'd been free to choose. He carried it like a stone in the boot. The idea that he'd bought a woman's whole life and no amount of good years could turn a purchase into a gift. It gnawed him. It made him quiet in a way I read wrong for years, thought it was just his nature, and it wasn't nature, it was doubt. He loved her, and he never let himself believe she loved him back, not free and clear, because how could a man believe that of a woman he'd paid for? And she died before he ever asked her, or she asked him, whatever the words would have been. She took a fever in the wet, cold February, and it went to her lungs, and it took her in 9 days. And there wasn't time. There's never time. And Silas came out of that room the morning she died with a face I'd only see match once more in my life. And that was the afternoon the wagon brought her sister up the lane. So that's the account, closed as I thought it was. The box was about to reopen it. It was the 3rd day before Ziving opened it. I was there. She'd wanted me there, I think, or wanted a 3rd person there, because whatever was in that box, she didn't want to be alone with just Silas when it came out. That told me something. That told me the box held something that concerned him, concerned them both. She'd found more English by then, or we'd all found more patience, and between her handful of words and Silas's handful of hers and a good deal of pointing and drawing on the back of a feed bill, we could get across simple things. She made us understand that 3rd morning that she was ready. She sat down at the table. She put both hands flat on the lid of the box and closed her eyes a moment, and I swear the woman prayed, though I couldn't tell you to what. Then she opened it. Inside, I'll tell you what I saw, because I've never forgotten the order of it. On top, letters, a thick bundle of them tied in red thread, the paper thin and folded small, covered edge to edge in columns of characters I couldn't read. Beneath the letters, money, not paper. Coin and worked silver, small ingots the shape of little boats, wrapped in cloth, a sum. I could see even not knowing the counting of it, that meant something, that meant years of something. And beneath the money, at the very bottom, wrapped separate in a square of blue silk, a smaller thing that Zigging lifted out with both hands and did not unwrap. She set it aside, still wrapped, and she put her hand flat on top of it and looked at Sila's, and there was a question in her face, and I did not understand the question, and neither did he. She took up the letters instead. She untied the red thread, and she began in her broken, careful Port English with long stops to hunt a word and longer stops for reasons that had nothing to do with words, to tell us what the letters were. They were May's. Every one, 12 years of them, sent home across the ocean to a sister in a village whose name I couldn't hold in my mouth. May had written home. All those years, the woman I'd thought so closed, so silent about her own heart, she'd been pouring it out the whole time, only in a direction none of us could read, in characters going the wrong way down the page to a girl on the other side of the world. And Zilling had brought them back. She'd brought back every word her sister ever sent her, carried them around the curve of the earth, and I couldn't understand yet why a woman would do that, would carry a dead sister's letters back to the country that killed her, until Zilling got the next part across, and it landed on Sila's crane like a felled tree. She hadn't come only to grieve. She hadn't come only because May's letters had stopped and she'd feared the worst and needed to know. She'd come because the last letter, the last one May ever sent, that reached the village after May was already 3 months dead, though the sister didn't know that yet when she read it, the last letter had asked her to come. Had told her it was safe now. Had told her the passage was paid. May had spent 12 years buying her sister's freedom. That was where the money went, the money Sila's had wondered about, the egg money and the sold calf money, and the little sums that never quite added up in a house where he otherwise knew every penny. May had been sending it home and saving it home and paying down a debt her sister was under, the same kind of debt. I understood now, watching Zigging's face, that May herself had once been under, that Sila's had once paid to free her, and the last letter said it was done. Paid in full. Come. There is a good man here and a good country, and I have made a place. Come and be free. Come and be free. And Zilling had come, sold what little was left, and come, weeks and weeks, and sat on a depot bench 2 days with her sister's letters and her sister's money and one thing wrapped in blue silk. Come the whole way to a reunion that had died of a fever in February, in a house she'd never seen, to a good man who hadn't known she existed. Sila's made a sound and put his hand over his mouth, because he was understanding it, all of it, faster than I was. He was understanding that his wife had loved him, had written it, apparently, in these letters, over and over to the one person she could say it to in her own tongue, had loved him so plainly, and for so long that she'd built her whole secret life around one dream, which was to bring the last of her blood across the water to the place where she was happy. To him. She'd wanted her sister to come and see it. See the good man. See the free life. See that May Crane had not been bought and thrown away. That she had been bought and had turned it, with her own 2 hands and 12 years of hidden coins, into something she was proud enough of to summon her sister across an ocean to witness. And he'd never known. He'd spent 11 years not believing she loved him free and clear, and the proof had been going out in the mail the whole time in a language he couldn't read, and it had only come home now, in a black box, in the arms of a woman with his dead wife's face, too late to tell May he finally knew. Sila's got up from the table. Fast, the chair going over. He went out. The screen door banged, and I heard his boots go off the porch, and I let him go, because some grief has to be walked off alone across open ground, and a man will not thank you for following. Zilling watched him go. Then she looked at me, and she pushed the small thing wrapped in blue silk across the table, toward the empty place where he'd been sitting, and she said, carefully, the most words I'd heard her put together, for him. She say, when I find him, this for him. I looked at the small blue bundle. I did not touch it. What is it? I said, not really asking, dreading. Zilling's face did the thing May's used to do when she was deciding if the world deserved an answer. And she decided it did. I didn't touch the blue silk bundle. Not that morning. Some things you leave for the man they're meant for, even when you're eaten alive to know. Sila's walked till near dark. I saw him out on the north rise, a small stubborn shape against a sky going bruise-colored. And I left him to it, and I stayed at the house so Zilling wouldn't be alone in a stranger's rooms in a strange country on the day she'd learned the sister she crossed the world for was under the frost out back. I made coffee badly. She drank it anyway, to be kind, which was a May thing to do and near broke me to see. We sat, And through that long afternoon, with the letters spread between us and her hunting each word like a woman crossing a creek stone by uncertain stone, Ziving gave me the shape of the whole thing. Not all at once, not in order. But by the time Silas's boots hit the porch after dark, I understood what her sister's life had truly been, and I understood the weight of what waited in the blue silk, and I want to lay it down here the way I finally understood it, so you carry it the way I had to. May and Ziving were born in a village I'll not try to spell, in a hard year in a country having harder ones. Their father died when Ziving was small. There were debts. In that place and time, Ziving gave me to understand. A family's debts had a way of being paid in daughters. And May, being the elder, being the one old enough, was the one who paid. She was 16. A man came through buying girls for the passage to America, for the houses in the cities there, and he bought May's debt, which is a clean way of saying he bought May. And he took her across the water to San Francisco, and what happened to her there in those first years Ziving did not have the English for, and I did not have the heart to press for. I know the shape of it. Everyone out here knows the shape of it and pretends they don't. She was 19 or 20, and inside a life she had not chosen and could not leave. A debt on her that only grew the way those debts were built to grow, designed so a girl could never pay her way out, only deeper in. And into that came Silas Crane. Here Ziving's face changed, because May had written this part home, written it many times, and Ziving had read it many times, and she loved this part the way you love the one good turn in a bad story. Silas had come to the city to sell cattle and buy a bull and do the business a rancher does, and he had Ziving searched a long while for the word, and finally just pressed her hand flat over her own heart and looked at me, and I nodded, because some things don't need the word. He'd loved her. On sight or near it. A big quiet range man of 30-odd who'd never had much luck with words or women, standing in a place decent men pretended they'd never been, looking at a girl who was not for sale in any way that meant anything, only rented, only trapped, and he'd gone back. That was the thing. He'd gone back a second time and a third, not for what those places sold, but just to sit with her. Ziving made me understand, just to sit, which cost the same and bought him nothing but her company, and the people who ran the place must have thought him a fool. And then he'd paid her debt, all of it, a sum that Ziving named, and that made me set my coffee down, because I knew what Silas ran, and I knew what that sum was against it. It was near everything. It was the ranch nearly over. It was years of a man's whole life's work handed across a table in a city to free a woman he'd known a matter of weeks, with no promise she'd have him after, because, and this is the part that undid me, this is the part I made Ziving say twice to be sure I had it, he hadn't made it a condition. He'd paid her free and told her she was free. Free to marry him or free to go. Her choice, no debt owed to him either. He'd made that plain. He'd freed her from him too in the same breath he freed her from the rest. And she'd chosen him. Free and clear. The one thing he never let himself believe. She'd done it standing on the only truly free ground she'd stood on in 5 years, with the whole open country in front of her and no chain on her anywhere. And she'd turned around and chosen the quiet cattleman who'd beggared himself to give her the choosing. She'd written it home to her sister that very month. Ziving had the letter. She held it up, this thin folded page 12 years old, soft as cloth from handling, and she read me a line of it, read it in the Chinese first, which I couldn't follow, but which had a rise and fall to it like something sung, and then gave it to me in her broken English, slow. I could go anywhere, I stay, not because I must, because I wish. Remember this, little sister, a person can be bought and still after give herself away for free. That is the only gift that means anything. I have given it, I am happy. I had to get up and stand at the window a while then. I'm not ashamed to say it. Because Silas was out on that north rise in the dark believing to this hour. This very hour, that maybe she'd only stayed because where would a woman go? And the answer, the whole free and clear answer, had been sitting in a box in a village across the ocean for 12 years. And it had come home 3 months too late to save him from that doubt while she lived. And just in time, maybe, to save him from carrying it the rest of his own life. That was the mercy in it. I clung to that. There's a mercy in a truth that comes too late. It's too late for the joy of it, but it's not too late to stop a lie. Silas would never again get to tell May he believed her, but he'd never again get to not believe her either. The box had killed that doubt dead. Small mercy. But out here you learn to bank the small ones. I've got a whole column of them. Now the money. 12 years, May had sent money home. Started the very first year she was married, before there was hardly money to send, sending it anyway, a little, hidden inside the household accounts that Silas trusted her to keep. And I want to be careful here because a lazy man would call that stealing, and I'll not have May Crane called a thief in my hearing or in these pages. It was her money. It was egg money and butter money and the small trade a ranch wife runs on the side, and it was hers by every right. And if she kept a portion of it dark from her own husband, it was not from him. It was for her sister, and it was the only way she knew to do a thing that could not be explained across the language they had, not in the years before Silas had any of her tongue. Because here's what she was doing with it. She was buying Ziving out of the same debt life she'd been bought out of. The same trap. It had reached Ziving too, of course it had, the way those things do. A younger sister coming up behind. The debt not dying with the father but breeding, and May knew it, May had lived it, and May was not going to let her sister vanish into a San Francisco crib the way she nearly had. So year by hidden year, coin by coin, ingot by little silverboat ingot, she'd bought it down. 12 years to pay off a debt engineered never to be paid. And she'd done it. That last letter, the come and be free one, that was May telling her sister the debt was cleared at last, the passage was bought, the road was open. And the money in the box, the money Ziving carried back. Ziving explained it, and I made her say it 3 times. It was the last of it, the final payment. May had sent it with the letter, or sent the means for it, and the debt had come in under the sum. There was money left over, and rather than keep the surplus, Ziving had brought it. Carried a dead woman's leftover freedom money around the world. Through weeks where she'd been hungry, I could see it on her. Weeks where that silver would have bought her a soft bed and a full plate and she hadn't touched it. Because it wasn't hers. Because May had earned it out of a ranch in America and it belonged, Ziving had decided somewhere in the middle of that terrible ocean, back at that ranch. To the good man, to Silas. Who'd near ruined himself 12 years back to start the whole chain of freedom that ended with Ziving sitting free at his table. She wanted to give the man his money back. I sat with that a long time. It's the kind of accounting I understand, you see. It's exactly the kind of thing that lives in a ledger. A debt run around the whole circle of the world and come home to be squared. Silas had paid to free May. May had spent 12 years paying to free Ziving. And now Ziving had crossed the earth to lay the remainder back in Silas's hands, closing a circle that had cost 3 lives everything they had and had, against every odd, actually worked, everyone in it free at the end. Except that the one who'd built it wasn't alive to see the last stone set. I've balanced a lot of books. I never saw one balance like that. It's the only truly finished ledger I ever encountered, and it was written in a language I can't read by a woman under the frost, and it cost more than any sum I ever penciled. And then there was the blue silk. I'd left it lying by his overturned chair all afternoon. Ziving kept looking at it. So did I, and when Silas's boots finally came up on the porch in the full dark, and the screen door opened, and he stood there in it, hollowed out, wind-scoured, his eyes gone to that dry red that's past crying, Ziving stood up. She didn't reach for the letters. She didn't reach for the money. She picked up the little blue-wrapped thing off the floor by his chair, and she carried it around the table to him, and she held it out in both hands, the way you hold out a thing that matters more than you can say in any language you own. She say, Ziving told him, and her voice shook, and it was so nearly May's voice that Silas swayed on his feet. In letter, last one, she say when you find him. Give him this, only him. Silas looked at the bundle. He didn't take it. His hands stayed at his sides like they'd forgotten they were hands. What is it, he said, rough, barely a voice at all. And Ziving, because May had trusted her with the answer, and she'd carried it faithfully across the whole turning world, told him. I heard it. I was right there, and I heard every word, and I have never repeated it to a living soul until I set it down here. And I've thought a long time about whether I had the right. And I've decided the dead get to have their say, and I'm only the pencil. The blue silk held a small thing, a curl of hair fine and dark, tied with thread. And a flat jade token no bigger than a coin, old, worn smooth, worn by more hands than May's. The one thing, Ziving said, that May had carried out of the village and kept through everything, through the passage and the city and the years, the one thing that was truly hers from before all of it. And she'd sent it back to her sister with instructions, if the letters ever stopped, if Ziving ever came looking and found what Ziving had in fact found. Then this, the hair, the jade, the last of home, was to go to Silas, into his hand, only his. Because Ziving said, and here she had to stop and start and stop again, because May had been trying to have a child. Had wanted one badly for years, and it hadn't come. And then late, too late that last winter it finally had, and the fever had taken them both, the mother and the not-yet child together, in the same 9 days. And that was the thing Silas had never told me, the thing I'm putting down now for the first time. It wasn't only his wife he buried in February. It was the child he'd wanted his whole quiet life and got hold of for one winter and lost before it drew breath. The curl of hair was May's own. There was no baby's hair to send. There'd been no baby to grow it. The jade was the only inheritance May had to leave a child that never came. And so she'd left instruction long before, back when she still had hope. Her most precious thing was to go to the family she'd made, one way or another. If there was a child, to the child. And if there was no child, Ziving's eyes went to the empty chair to the north where the graves were, and back to Silas. If there was no child, then to him, to the good man. So that the one thing she'd carried out of the whole hard world would not end with her in the frost, but would rest, instead, in the living hand she'd chosen free and clear on the only free day of her life. Ziving pressed it into his hand and closed his fingers over it with both of hers. And Silas Crane, who did not weep at the grave, who grieved like a fence post, who I had watched hold himself upright through 11 months of a silence I'd read all wrong. Silas Crane sat down on the floor of his own kitchen with his dead wife's hair and her one jade in his fist, and he put his face against the seat of her empty chair, and he came apart the way the ground comes apart in a thaw, all at once, all the winter of it at once. I put on my hat. I stepped out onto the porch into the dark, and I stood there with the killdeer and the wind and the endless smell of sage, and I let that house hold what it needed to hold without me in it. There are debts you can pay and debts you can only witness. I stood on the porch a long while witnessing. Grief doesn't end. Anybody tells you it ends is selling something. What it does, if you're lucky and stubborn and the country doesn't finish you first, is change shape. It goes from a thing that's happening to you into a thing you're carrying, and a carried thing, however heavy, you can at least walk with. Silas started walking with it that autumn. Slow, but walking. The morning after the box, I came up the lane at first light, half afraid of what I'd find, and I found smoke in the chimney and the two of them in the kitchen, Silas at the stove, of all things. A man who to my knowledge had never once cooked in 11 years of marriage, standing there frowning at a pan like it owed him money, and Ziving beside him with her hand out saying a word, a Chinese word, patient, and him repeating it wrong, and her saying it again, and him getting it a little less wrong. Teaching him. Her sister's language, word by word across a frying pan at dawn. I stood in the doorway, and neither of them heard me, and I watched a full minute before I made my boots known. And I'll tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking that the man was going to learn to read those letters. That's what I was watching start. He was going to learn her tongue, the tongue she'd written her whole hidden heart in, and he was going to sit down someday with that red-threaded bundle and read 12 years of his wife telling her sister she loved him, read it in her own words, in her own hand, going the right way down the page at last. It'd take him years. He had years. It's the only thing out here we've generally got a surplus of. That's a kind of resurrection, if you want to call it one. Not her. Never her. But her voice, coming back into that house one hard-won word at a time, in the mouth of a man who'd have crawled to the bottom of the sea to hear it. Now I have to tell you about the decision, because you've been waiting for it, and because it was the heaviest thing that autumn, and it fell to Silas, and it was not simple. Ziving could not stay. I mean that in the way the country meant it, which was the cruelest way. A young unmarried Chinese woman alone, living out at a widower's ranch with no relation between them but a dead wife. This country had laws about the first part and vicious opinions about the rest, and both would land on her, not on him. There were men in Ashfork who'd have made her life a misery for sport, and church women who'd have done it out of righteousness, which is worse. Silas knew it. I knew it. And Ziving, who had spent her whole life reading exactly how much danger a room held, knew it best of all. I'd watched her clock it that first day, watched her go quiet and careful in town. A woman who understood in her bones what it cost to be unprotected in a place that had already decided about her. So there was the money. The surplus. The freedom money May had died with a balance on, that Ziving had carried around the world to hand back. Silas would not take it. Of course he wouldn't. He pushed it back across the table the first night he was able to talk about it at all, and here was the heavy thing, here was the decision that had teeth in it. That money was enough, near exactly enough, as if May had measured it, and maybe in some way she had, to buy Ziving a life. Passage on to a city where there were others of her people, a Chinese quarter, a place she might not be alone and hunted, or a small trade of her own. Or, and this was the thing Zitting herself wanted, that she got across to us over several careful evenings, passage home. Back over the ocean. Back to the village. Because there was still family there, distant but there, and there was the ground her mother was buried in, and there was the whole known world of her, and she was free now, truly free. Free the way her sister had bought her to be, and a free person, Zitting gave me to understand, gets to choose which side of an ocean to be free on. She wanted to go home. And Silas, this is the decision. This is the whole weight of it. Silas wanted her to stay. Not the way you're thinking. Get that out of your head. It wasn't in his. He wanted her to stay because she was the last of May on this earth, the last face, the last voice, the last hand that had held the same jade May held. Because letting her get on a wagon and go was letting the final thread of his wife go with her, and he had just, that very autumn, gotten her voice back into his house, and here was the source of it wanting to leave, and every selfish, grieving fiber of the man wanted to find a reason she had to stay. And he had reasons, good ones. He could have married her, men did, it happened, a widower and a sister-in-law. It would have given her his name and his protection and silenced the town near enough. He could have made it a bargain, the way his whole history with this family had started with a bargain. He could have offered her safety in exchange for staying, and it would even have been kindness of a hard, practical kind, and no one would have blamed him. He didn't do it. I watched him not do it, over about 2 weeks, and it was the finest thing I ever watched a man not do. Because he understood, it came to him slow, the way things came to Silas, but it came. He understood what May had written in that 12-year-old letter, the line Zitting had read me at the window. A person can be bought and still, after, give herself away for free. That is the only gift that means anything. He understood that his whole life with May had turned on one thing and one thing only, that he had freed her first and asked after and left the choosing truly hers. That was the hinge the entire miracle swung on. And here was her sister, freed by May's own 12-year labor, standing on free ground for maybe the first breath of her life. And if Silas so much as leaned on her, so much as made her safety depend on staying, he'd be putting a chain back on the one person May had spent everything to unchain. He'd be undoing his wife's life's work with his own grieving hands. So he took the money, the surplus, the freedom money, and one gray morning he added to it. Added a good deal to it. Sold stock to do it, which the man could ill afford twice in one lifetime, and did anyway, because apparently that's just who he was, a man who'd beggar himself to free the women of that family. And he put the whole sum in Zitting's hands, and through her handful of his words and his handful of hers and me in the middle straightening the crooked places, he told her, "Go home or stay, or go to the city. You're choosing, free and clear, no debt to me and none to your sister and none to her memory. She'd have wanted your feet on whatever ground you choose, not the ground that's convenient to my grief. And whatever you choose, this is yours, it was always going to be yours. Your sister made sure of it before either of us knew your name." Free and clear. The same words, the same gift. 12 years and one dead wife later, in the same kitchen, he made the same choice May had bet her whole life he'd make. And he made it to her sister, and she wasn't even there to see him prove her right. Or maybe she was. I'm not a religious man and I keep my ledger in this world. But I stood in that kitchen and watched Silas Crane free the last of the Chen sisters exactly the way he'd freed the first. And if there's a thing in us that outlasts the frost, it was in that room, and it was satisfied. She chose to go home. I'll be honest, it hurt him. He'd hoped, right to the end, some small part of him. But when she chose it, when she got it across that her heart was still in that far village and always would be, and she wanted to be free there, he nodded, and something in his face settled, and I understood he was glad under the hurt. Glad because it was a free woman's choice, and he'd made sure it was free, and that made it right. And Silas had spent his whole life learning that the right thing and the thing you want are two different roads, and you take the right one and you don't complain about your feet. Prout came for her on a Thursday, the proper day this time. She'd stayed near a month. In that month she'd taught Silas maybe 200 words and how to make 3 dishes badly and how her sister used to laugh, which was a thing none of us out here had ever quite seen. May laughed careful, private. But Zitting showed him the whole open version of it, threw her head back doing it, and told him with her hands and her few words that May had laughed like that as a girl before the debt, before the boat. So he got that too. He got to know his wife as a girl who laughed with her whole head thrown back, 30 years and half a world away, through the one person left alive who'd seen it. The morning she left, she gave Silas back one thing out of the box. Not the money, that was settled. Not the letters, those she left with him, all of them, 12 years of them, for him to spend the rest of his life learning to read, which she knew he'd do. She told me so. She said he will read her. Someday. He will read all of her, and she was right, he did. But that's a longer story than this one, and not mine to tell all of. She gave him back the jade. The little worn token, the last of the village that May had left to the family she made. Ziving had carried it to him as instructed. And now, leaving, she took it from around her own neck where she'd worn it that month, and she put it back in Silas's hand and closed his fingers on it the same way she had the first night. And she said, the most and best English I heard her manage the whole time, you family. She make you family. Not blood she make, this stay with family, this stay with you. And she got up on the wagon box beside Prout, and she did not weep. She'd done her weeping. She sat with her chin up exactly the way her sister used to and looked at the ranch a long moment. The house, the north rise, the two graves that were three, mother and unborn child under one stone and May's own beside. And then she looked forward down the lane, toward the road that went to the railhead that went to the coast that went across the whole turning ocean to a village with her mother's grave in it. The wagon pulled out. The dust came up behind it, that low brown feather hanging in the still air. Silas stood in the lane and watched her go the whole quarter hour it takes to watch a person go. Out here, watched the dust. Then just the shape, then just the dust again, then nothing, then the settling, then the empty road. He stood there after there was nothing left to watch. He had the jade in one fist and the other hand hung open at his side, and the wind came across the grass the way it always does, not caring. And I stood off at the fence where I'd been the first day, where I'd set down my pliers, and I let him have it. I've got the ledger open in front of me as I set this down, years on now. Silas is still out on that ranch, older. Quieter if that's possible, but a different quiet, not the fence post quiet of the grieving man, the other kind. The kind that's got something at the bottom of it instead of a hole. He reads Chinese now some. Enough. I've seen him at May's table with a letter unfolded and his lips moving, an old raw-boned range man sounding out his dead wife's heart one column at a time, years into it, in no hurry, because he's got her voice for the rest of his life now, and a man doesn't rush a thing like that. There's a letter comes once a year or so from across the ocean. Comes to me, actually, I read better than he does still and write back for us both. From Ziving, she's well. She married over there a man of her own choosing, free and clear, which I made sure to note in the ledger with some satisfaction. She sends word. She asks after him. She always writes the same last line, the same words, and I read them to Silas every time, and every time he goes to the window and stands a while. Tell the good man his family is well on both sides of the water. I keep the ledger for the truth and nothing else, and here is the truest thing I know, that I've come to late, the way Silas came to everything, the way the box came up that lane, too late for the joy of it, but in time to stop the lie. We think the answers we spend our lives wanting will be the ones that finish a thing, close the account, let us rest. But the real answers, the ones that come around the whole curve of the world in a black box in a dead woman's hand, they don't close anything. They open it. They open you up and they leave you open, standing in a lane watching dust settle, holding one worn jade in a fist that used to hold a wire pliers, family now, made not blood, on both sides of a water too wide to see across.